I arrived earlier than planned. The Hayes brownstone in Beacon Hill glowed from the sidewalk warm lights. Through old glass golden tinsel wrapped around the banisters. Silhouettes shifting behind half-drawn curtains. Boston's December air bit at my cheeks as I climbed the steps, tugging my coat tighter. I'd left the company holiday party an hour early, thinking it would be sweet to surprise everyone. I thought it would mean something to show up first for once, instead of drifting in after work with gifts and apologies. I had no idea I was walking straight into the moment my entire life split clean in half. The moment the front door clicked shut behind me, I heard his voice, Mike's voice, bright, triumphant. "She's pregnant. Claire's pregnant. We're having a son." The words hit me like a blunt physical punch. I froze in the narrow foyer, my hand still on the doorknob. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard. There was no way, no universe where my husband was telling a room full of people that he was expecting a child with another woman. No universe where he would say something like that, publicly, joyfully surrounded by family. But then the room erupted. Applause, laughter, cheers. Someone whistled. Someone cried, "Finally!" I moved forward slowly, like I was walking underwater, like my body was moving, but my brain had stopped. Through the archway, the living room opened in front of me. A huge Christmas tree dominated the corner, strung with warm white lights. Red bows, glass ornaments. Under it, piles of gifts wrapped in shiny metallic paper. Everything looked perfect, too perfect, like a magazine cover version of Christmas Eve. And in the middle of it all was my husband. Mike stood with his arm around Claire Bennett, his high school sweetheart, the one he had sworn 1,000 times meant nothing anymore. She was radiant, glowing in a way I'd never seen her before. Her hand curved gently across her stomach. His hand covered hers, fingers intertwined intimately. They looked like a family already. My vision went fuzzy at the edges. Linda was crying big, wet, trembling tears of joy as she clasped her hands together. Robert clapped Mike on the back, already raising a glass of wine. Cousins I barely knew leaned forward to hug Claire, while others shouted congratulations like this was news they had been waiting their entire lives to hear. And they were all smiling, every single one of them, everyone except me. From the shadows of the hallway, I stood unnoticed like a ghost in my own life, watching a celebration that was never meant for me. My mind scrambled desperately, trying to assemble logic where there was none. Claire is pregnant. They're having a son. Everyone knows. Everyone is happy. But I, Mike's wife, am standing here invisible hearing it, accidentally because I showed up early to help set the table. A man near the fireplace, one of Robert's friends from his old construction management job, spoke up loud enough to cut through the noise. But what about Emily? Does she know yet? The room fell silent, a heavy, sudden, suffocating quiet. Mike exhaled, shifting his weight. His smile faltered, something strained sliding beneath his expression. "Not yet," he said. "I'm still sorting out paperwork. But I'll tell her soon. So please nobody say anything when she arrives." Nervous laughter trickled through the room. Someone toasted to timing. Someone else joked about women taking bad news. But it was Robert's voice that sliced through me like glass. "Well," he chuckled, "as long as the papers get signed, everything will work out. We've waited long enough." My stomach dropped. papers. He meant the document Mike had brought home 2 weeks ago. The power of attorney I hadn't signed yet because I was too busy closing a year-end project. The one he said was just for convenience. The one that suddenly felt like a loaded gun. Linda wiped her eyes and said with a trembling smile that looked nothing like the woman I grew up trusting, "Finally, my son. After all these years, we can reclaim what should have been ours." The words detonated in my chest. Reclaim what should have been theirs. Suddenly, everything aligned in a clean, horrifying line. My parents' death, their move into my home, their help managing the estate, Mike taking over the rentals, the pressure to sign the POA, the sudden insistence that I trust family. They hadn't been helping me. They had been studying me, positioning themselves, waiting, planning. And this child, their celebration, wasn't just a scandal, it was leverage, the final piece in a long, careful con. I had been too naive, too grateful, too lonely to see. I stepped back into the foyer, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The lights blurred. My chest squeezed tight, breath shallow. I fumbled for my coat on the rack. I slipped out of the brownstone as quietly as I had entered. No one noticed. Not a single head turned. They were too busy celebrating the child my husband conceived with another woman, the child they believed would unlock my inheritance. Outside, the cold was brutal. The kind of cold that chewed through wool and skin and bone. I barely felt it. I walked to my car mechanically, like a puppet whose strings had been severed. Once inside, I slammed the door, and the sound echoed against the car interior, shattering some invisible wall inside me. I didn't cry immediately. Shock is strange, it dulls your emotions, so you don't explode all at once. I stared at the windshield wipers, idle, watching tiny snowflakes drift lazily past the streetlights. The world looked peaceful, serene, deceptively gentle. I let out a breath that wasn't really a breath, more like my body collapsing inward. Then another, and suddenly, tears burst forward in hot, violent waves. My whole face burned, shoulders shaking as I tried to breathe. I cried for the betrayal, for the humiliation, for the years I had trusted people who had only ever wanted what I had, for the version of myself I still believed existed, protected, loved, safe. But the tears didn't last long. They dried with a clarity I didn't recognize at first. A cold, razor-sharp awareness slicing through the fog. What they had done to me, what they had planned, what they believed they were entitled to. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not now, not after hearing it with my own ears. The image of Linda lifting her glass. The glint in Robert's eyes, the way Mike squeezed Claire's hand. They ignited something inside me that no amount of grief could extinguish. They thought I was weak. They thought I was blind. They thought I would sign anything, accept anything, forgive anything. They had no idea who I really was. I wiped my face, steadied my breathing, and reached for the ignition. The engine hummed to life, low, steady, familiar. Something to hold on to. I drove home through a blur of snow and city lights, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel as possibilities formed like constellations in my mind. My training, my instincts, the part of me that managed multi-million-dollar projects under pressure. All of it came rushing back like a dormant muscle awakening. If they wanted a game, they were about to get one. But it would be played my way when I reached my condo in Back Bay. The quiet hit me like a wall. No laughter, no celebration, no lies. I stood in the dark living room for a long minute, letting the silence settle into my bones. My reflections stared back at me from the window. Pale, hollow-eyed, a stranger wearing my face. I whispered into the empty room, voice steady and low. Enough. That one word flipped a switch inside me. I dried my face, tied my hair back, turned on every light, spread every document, every contract, every rental record across the dining table, and for the first time that night, I felt grounded, in control, alive. My phone buzzed a text from Mike. "Where are you? Everyone's asking." I stared at the message, the audacity, the entitlement, the casual cruelty of pretending nothing had happened. My fingers moved on their own, stayed at the company party. "See you later. Love you." I hit send without flinching. Let him believe I was still clueless. Let them all believe it. It would make what came next even sweeter. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the papers. The numbers, the signatures, the pieces were already there. I just had to reassemble them, and I would. When I finally turned off the lights and crawled into bed, the anger had settled into something far more dangerous. Purpose, determination, focus. Sleep didn't come easy, but when it did, it came with a promise. Tomorrow everything changes, and none of them will see it coming. If you're still with me, if you're reading this and feeling that fire in your own chest, don't look away. Because this isn't a story about betrayal, it's a story about what happened 3 weeks later, when the people who thought they owned my life discovered exactly what I'm capable of. Morning came in a thin gray slice that leaked between the blinds. I hadn't slept much. True rest had been a casualty of the night before, but the city moving outside the window felt like an accomplice, now ordinary and indifferent. That indifference was useful. It let me turn the pain into something useful, a checklist. I pulled on jeans and an old sweater, went through the motions of a person assembling herself for war. The first call was to Mr. Harris. He answered on the second ring, his voice sleepy but attentive, exactly what I needed. "Emily," he said, "you sound like you didn't sleep." That obvious, I smiled, though it wasn't a smile he could see. "I need to come by. Please. Today." He didn't hesitate. 10 a.m. Bring whatever documents you have. Don't sign anything. And don't confront anyone until we talk. Hanging up, I felt the familiar twin currents of fear and strategy. Fear at the rawness of the betrayal strategy, because I'd spent a decade turning nebulous problems into deliverables. The lawyer's list of deliverables was simple paperwork. Proof, chain of custody. The rest would follow a legal cadence I trusted. I opened the desk drawer where I kept the main folder my parents had left. Title deeds, trust documents, the mortgage papers, a letter from my mother with her looping script that always felt like a warm hand. I read it once more, feeling the weight of lineage and responsibility settle onto my shoulders like a tangible thing. It wasn't just money they had given me, it was stewardship. Someone had decided stewardship wasn't theirs to share. My fingers skimmed through bank statements I'd kept mostly for peace of mind. Little nothings to prove the spreadsheets true. Something in me had always been meticulous about receipts. I was obsessive about traceability in my projects at work. Maybe that habit had been the one decent thing my parents left behind besides the brownstone. That habit would be useful now. At Mr. Harris's office, a brick building with a battered brass bell, he greeted me with a brief hug and a look that said he'd already suspected as much. He laid out coffee and a thick legal pad, then pushed the tablet across the table. "Tell me everything," he said. I told him the party, the announcement, the way Linda's smile folded into something that wasn't joy. How Robert's offhand comment about the papers landed like a reef beneath the waves. I kept my voice even. Details stuck where they needed to. Names, dates, the exact wording of sentences. Mr. Harris nodded, tapping on the tablet, then asked a question I'd been circling since midnight. "Has Mike ever shown you consolidated statements for the rental income?" he asked. "No," I said. "He used to give me a report, numbers here and there. He said he was reinvesting. I trusted him. Do you have access to the condo accounts?" He frowned at the page. Were they joint? They were technically mine. He managed them. I signed him on as manager informally. It was easier. I could feel the word easier sticking in my throat like bile. Easier had become blind. Mr. Harris's face worked into a plan. "We'll need a PI," he said. "We'll need full bank records. If there's diversion of funds, we'll need the trail. Don't confront anyone. And legally, do not record private conversations unless you're certain your state's consent laws allow it. But we can install security cameras in your property in ways that produce admissible video. I'll coordinate with a firm that understands the consent landscape." I left his office with a list and a number for a private investigator his office recommended. The PI's name was Jonah Morales, and his reputation was the sort of quiet competence you hired when you needed the truth without theatrics. He met me at a small coffee shop in the South End and unfolded the world of evidence in a way that made my stomach twist. People are sloppy when they think they own something, Jonah said, stirring his copemos. Bank accounts, credit cards, travel bookings, they leave fingerprints. We pull paper trails, we corroborate. We don't narrate. You let the data speak. He asked for access to every statement, every email, every login history I could provide. He wanted tenant files, lease agreements, any contract with service providers. He suggested trespassing checks on one of the condos Claire had been rumored to occupy. He recommended a cybersecurity sweep as well. Sometimes spreadsheets didn't match what curved through the digital arteries of a household. I handed him everything. I had digital folders. Paper copies, the lease agreements Mike had kept in a binder, not even locked. Watching him flip through the documents, I felt something small and dangerous settle in my chest. Vindication, but not the hollow kind. This felt precise, surgical. The messy emotional fury that had carried me through the driveway and the car ride had been refined into a blade. Back at the condo, I executed the smaller, quieter moves. Harris had instructed me on what cameras I could legally install, common areas within my own property, posted notices to tenants about surveillance, no hidden audio devices. Legality had a way of shaping morality here. It felt almost comforting to move within lines that couldn't be questioned. I called a boutique security company, someone who'd done discreet installs for art galleries and small law firms. The technician, Gabe, arrived in a flannel shirt, and had a considerate way of making the technical feel intimate. "We'll set them in obvious places," he said, mapping lenses to the living room, the entryway, the kitchen places. Someone would be seen, not whispers, video only. "We'll set up remote access for you and your counsel. Chain of custody is key if this is ever to be used in court." When he left, the house felt different, reoriented toward observation. Light glanced off camera domes, and the hum of a discreet recorder felt like a new heartbeat in the rooms that had known only family voices. That afternoon, Jonah called with an initial report that I wanted like an ache but feared like a fever. "There's a diversion," he said, "not catastrophic yet, but consistent. Multiple deposits from your tenant's checks are being routed to an account ending in 3243. The account is in Michael Reynolds' name. We traced several charges, travel hotels, some high-value jewelry purchases." The jewelry knife twisted. I remembered the pearl necklace my grandmother gave me, the small sapphire pendant from my father's anniversary note tucked in my jewelry box. A blankness opened inside me, edged with cold. "Can you get statements?" I asked. "Yes," Jonah said. "It's messy, but there's a trail. He's been siphoning funds intermittently, laundering it through short-term stays, then pulling cash out. We can map it. And there's one condo, Unit 3B, where there's occupancy with no rent recorded. We suspect Claire." The world narrowed then into tasks: confirm, documents secure. I called the property management company Mr. Harris suggested and signed an agreement that transferred rental administration to them, effective immediately. The contract had been crafted to avoid sudden bank disruptions and orderly handoff that would leave no breathing room for Michael's improvisations. The manager, a woman named Priya with hair cropped close and a voice that left no room for debate, said two things that felt like small victories. "We'll change payment routing on the 1st of the month," she told me. "Tenants will sign updated leases next week. We'll notify them discreetly so we don't cause a panic." "And the tenant in 3B?" I asked. "We'll do a standard verification," Priya said. "If someone's living there without verifying tenancy or making payments, we escalate. Eviction is a process. We follow it." I left her office calmer than I had been since the party. The plan was not dramatic, it was patient and sterile. In that patience lived power. I had watched enough season of my life when theatrical outbursts produced consequences I could not control. This was administration, this was law, this was containment. That evening, after a day of phone calls and signatures, I went home and opened the safe. My hands moved with small, furious reverence. The safe had been my mother's idea. Keep what's worth the grief, she'd said, and I had liked the phrase then, and even more now. Inside, amid birth certificates and the letter from my mother, there were the pieces that meant most. The pearl strand, the sapphire pendant, a small gold bracelet, engraved with a childish nickname. I took them out and counted them slowly, like inventorying wounds. Some pieces were missing. A small, terrible clarity spread through me. Someone had sifted through my things. The thought felt intimate and vulgar, like someone had read my private history aloud and spat through the pages. The anger flared hot and immediate. I changed the safe combination then and there, doing it with hands so steady the motion felt rehearsed. I also packed a small bag. Not to run, this wasn't panic, but to have options. I slipped Mike's car key into my purse, a petty little maneuver, the sort of thing that made me feel like I could pull a lever he couldn't predict. I locked the apartment and drove 2 blocks to a boutique hotel I'd used once on a weekend when a project deadline made me sleep in the city. I checked in under an alias, though it was more ritual than necessity. From the hotel, I opened the camera feed and watched my home. My own rooms looked strange through a lens angles I knew intimately became new. I clicked between live and recorded, letting the sequence of the daily unfold at my fingertips, like a play I was directed to watch. There in the living room, my kitchen, the window seats. The footage was ordinary, too ordinary. I felt a pang of cold. What if the evidence came up short? What if everything I believed was true could not be proven? Then as the city outside dimmed into evening lights, the front door camera picked up motion. Mike arrived earlier than usual, carrying a duffel bag and a face set in a way I'd seen before when he thought no one watched. He was alone at first, then Claire slipped in behind him, shoulders tight, eyes wide. She moved through my house with a casual lack of permission that felt designed to sting. They talked quietly, at first laughter and low voices. My stomach tightened. I watched them sit on the couch, Kate's scarf thrown over the armrest. The way Claire let her head rest on Mike's shoulder. The feed had no audio. It gave me only posture timing touch. Little telling things, Claire smoothing her skirt, as if making herself comfortable in familiarity. Mike's hand closing over hers in the way of someone who had rehearsed comfort. At one point, Mike's phone buzzed. He typed. His face fell. He typed again. He left the room and stormed into the kitchen, pounding at a cabinet, then exhaling. When he returned, his hands were empty. Claire adjusted her hair. The domesticity of the scene made the betrayal feel absurd. Plain as a photograph, intimate normalcy that had no place in my life. I watched until fatigue blurred the feed together, and then set the system to record. My breath slowed in the hotel room. There was no elation, only an edge of cold anticipation. The cameras would do their work. The accounts were being changed administratively. The PI was combing transaction lines. The legal firm was ready to move when the evidence was consolidated and served. I lay on the hotel bed and watched the elevator light blink in the far corner of the feed as house activity quieted. The city hummed. People in other lives put on pajamas and closed their doors. My hands, usually steady, used to managing crises at work, felt small on the coverlet. I wasn't sure what the next step would demand of me: confrontation, accusation, spectacle. I only knew the next steps would be deliberate. The months of small tolerances and good faith I'd extended had hardened into a dossier that would not be shrugged aside. My parents had taught me more than stewardship. They had taught me to build something that lasted. Now I would use that craft against the people who had used my trust as a currency. Outside, a car alarm barked once and clattered into silence. Inside my father's letter in the safe, a loop of ink told me to always remember who I was. I traced the letters with my fingertip, the same motion I had as a child learning to write. Then I turned back to the feed and watched as the living room couch settled into stillness. For the first time since the party, I allowed myself to imagine the shape of revenge that felt like justice, meticulous, legal, inevitable. And somewhere in the quiet between then and the next day, the phone buzzed faintly. Jonah had sent a single-line preliminary map attached. I opened the attachment, and in the hush of the hotel room, let the financial architecture of betrayal unfold. The next morning began with a vibration against the nightstand. Jonah's preliminary map still glowed on my laptop screen, from the hours before a latticework of transactions and dates traced in sharp red lines. The kind of diagram you might find pinned on the wall of a detective's office, except this time the victim and the investigator were the same person. I let the phone buzz twice before answering. Emily Jonah said, his voice composed, almost clinical. I spent half the night overlaying roots. We've got plenty to work with already. I'll brief you in person if you can get to my office. I agreed, got dressed, and left the hotel with a sense of movement sharp enough to cut through the fatigue pulling at my bones. Outside, Boston's winter sky hung low, colorless, and heavy. The kind of sky that threatened snow but offered only a dull metallic chill. On the drive, the world looked deceptively ordinary. Joggers on the Charles, bundled in layers, a dog pulling its owner past a bakery window. Delivery trucks double-parked along Newbury Street. While the city lived its unbothered life, mine was being dissected in spreadsheets, timelines, and camera feeds. A strange duality, but I felt steadier now in a way that didn't resemble normalcy so much as clarity. Jonah's office was nothing like what I expected. No dim lamps or corkboards crowded with photos. Instead, it was a renovated loft, polished concrete floors, glass partitions, and a single large monitor that served as the command center. He gestured for me to sit as he pulled up a file. I'll walk you through what we know. He clicked a button. The screen lit with a timeline. 5 years consistent pattern, small diversions at first, one-time transfers, 600 here, 200 there, then it escalates. He zoomed in. This cluster lasts 18 months. The withdrawals are systematic. Rents from 3 units deposited directly into Reynolds' personal account. The withdrawals fund resorts in Napa, Miami, Aspen. Only 2 people show up on the boarding passes, Michael Reynolds and Claire Bennett. The screen shifted. Hotel invoices, car rentals, salon charges, jewelry. It wasn't the amounts that punched the air from my lungs. It was the casualness, the entitled pattern. My life had been financing their vacations like a silent, obedient patron. Jonah zoomed out to show one more cluster: credits, not debits. And this, he said, this is the riskiest part. Wire transfers to a known online betting platform. High stakes, consistent losses. Reynolds isn't investing, he's gambling badly. The floor felt unsteady for a moment, not because of surprise, but because of recognition. My husband had always explained away stress with vague references to market fluctuations or crypto downturns. I'd assumed it was work frustration. Now it had form and intent. Jonah continued, "This isn't sloppy, it's calculated, but we have enough evidence to show malfeasance. You didn't consent, you didn't co-manage, and these weren't marital accounts." He tapped the desk. "Harris can do something with this." The name Harris grounded me. There was structure to this, a long corridor of steps. I wasn't wandering in a maze anymore. "I have one more thing," Jonah added, lowering the screen brightness. the tenant in 3B, who doesn't exist on paper. I pulled building entry logs, Claire's key fob borrowed from Michael's guest access, registered 46 times in the past 2 months. I leaned back. The grainy mental image of Claire moving through my home softened into something more grotesque, her coming and going in a property my parents entrusted to me. The reality was worse than the suspicion. "When can you give Harris the full packet?" I asked. "By tomorrow. Maybe tonight." Jonah nodded once. "And Emily, prepare yourself. Once this breaks open, everything will move fast." I thanked him and stepped outside. The cold slapped against my face, grounding me. Truth had its own temperature. By noon, I was in Harris's office again, handing off Jonah's early evidence. Harris scanned the documents, his brow tightening. "This is strong," he said. "We're moving toward criminal territory, misappropriation, conversion. Possibly fraud, but remember, the cleanest path remains civil. That's where you'll recover what you lost." He set the papers down gently, like they were heavier than their actual weight. "We need to file divorce intentions soon," he said, "but we'll do it on your terms, not his." I nodded. "I want everything done quietly," I said. "No warning. That's the only way this works." On the way home, my phone buzzed with a message from Mike. "When are you back tonight? Thought we could get dinner, make up for lost time." Lost time. The words ignited something sharp beneath my ribs. The gall of pretending everything was normal, the insistence on maintaining a narrative of a functioning marriage while planning to dismantle it behind my back. I didn't reply. Instead, I drove back to the condo and parked underground. I stayed in the car for a moment, breathing in the sterile scent of metal and rubber. My fingers hovered over the camera app. When the feed loaded, the first image was my living room. Mike wasn't home, but the room looked wrong. Subtle things. A coaster moved. A pillow shifted. A glass on the counter that I hadn't used. It was like someone had lived their own day in my space and left traces behind, careless and unmasked. I went upstairs slowly, unlocking the condo, with deliberate movements. Inside, the air was still, too still. Then I realized what it was. Silence had weight. I walked into the bedroom. Boxes had been shifted, my dresser drawers slightly ajar. Not rummaged, just touched, as if someone had examined the contents and tried to hide the evidence with a clumsy hand. One drawer, the jewelry drawer, hung open enough for me to see the indentations where velvet used to hold pieces that were now missing. Another twist of violation. I closed it quietly and turned toward the hallway. The lights felt harsher now. The condo, once familiar, felt staged like a set built for someone else's script. I brewed tea to steady my hands, then sat at the kitchen counter and opened Jonah's map again. I studied it until the movements made a kind of cold sense. The patterns were arrogant, using my money in cycles that repeated with the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. By late afternoon, the condo warmed in the orange wash of winter sunset. I moved through rooms with slow precision, taking stock of what was mine, what had been stolen, and what I still controlled. The contract with the management company had already been processed. Tenants had been notified. The change in rental routing was locked in. Mike would receive the news soon enough. Around 7, the condo's lock clicked. I stilled. Mike stepped in, stamping snow from his boots, untangling his scarf with an ease that felt offensive. He smiled when he saw me, like he'd walked into the home of someone he believed he still owned. "You're back early," he said, shrugging off his coat. "Thought you'd be stuck at the office all night. I wrapped things up. That's good." He walked over and kissed my cheek, a reflexive gesture, a performance. His hands were cold, his breath warm, and everything felt wrongly familiar. He didn't know that the floor beneath him had already begun to crack. He didn't know that the world he believed he'd built on my back was dissolving one legal clause at a time. He moved around the kitchen, opening the fridge, pouring water, wiping a countertop he'd never once cleaned in his life. I watched him quietly, seeing each movement with a new lens. Every habit seemed imbued with double meaning now. Every small action a deception. "How's Claire?" I asked. He froze for half a second, a perceptible hitch. Then he turned, smiling too quickly. "She's fine. Heard from her earlier." "Why?" His tone was breezy, but his eyes flickered in that way I now recognized, tiny fractures beneath a mask. "No reason," I said. We went through the evening motions, but nothing clicked into place. We moved like strangers, reenacting a marriage, rather than living one. At dinner, he brought up the POA again. "Hey, did you get a chance to look over the paperwork? It'd really help me out with the leases." There it was, the pivot point, the prelude. "I haven't decided," I said. "Oh, come on, Em. You trust me." He laughed lightly, an exhale designed to soothe. The irony nearly made me choke. "I'm thinking it over," I said. He nodded, but the tension at his jawline betrayed him. His thumb tapped against the table, an unintentional tell. Stress, concern, perhaps fear. Later he showered. I waited until the water ran before I opened the camera feed again, intent on reviewing the previous day's footage. That's when I noticed the timestamps around noon, motion detected in the bedroom. The hallway, the office corner. Claire, her posture, her hands, her casual invasion of a space she had no right to enter. I watched her pluck through drawers, her picking up the bracelet, her slipping something into her coat pocket. Mike had brought her back here earlier. They hadn't come merely to spend time together, they had been looking for something they thought I wouldn't notice missing. I leaned back in my chair as the weight of their arrogance settled over me. Later that night, after he'd fallen asleep, I sat in the living room and let the city noise bleed in through the windows. Sirens, snowplows, the hiss of tires. All of it felt like static against a decision forming in my mind. Events were converging. Evidence was locked. Management changes were in place. Legal strategy was primed. Claire had revealed her boldness. Mike had revealed his desperation. Everything was flowing toward a point of no return. When morning came, I watched him leave for the day with the same practiced smile he'd used for years. He shut the door behind him, humming under his breath. The quiet that followed felt like the eye of a storm. I opened my laptop and typed a message to Harris. "Let's file the motion. I'm ready." No tremor in my hands. No hesitation, just the clean, precise click of a decision already made. The architecture of collapse was complete. Now it only needed to be executed. The morning I told Harris I was ready felt strangely calm, as though the city itself had paused to inhale. I moved through the condo, gathering the last pieces of paperwork, the air around me taut with the quiet before a break. Outside, Boston was drowned in a slate-colored fog. streetlights still glowing even past sunrise, as if unsure whether to keep pretending it was night. I left Mike's car keys on the dining table where he always tossed them. I wanted them exactly where he believed he had left them. A tiny continuity to keep him certain nothing had shifted. Because certainty in people like him was blindness. By 10, Harris had drafted the filings, the divorce petition sealed with a temporary order request, a civil claim outlining misappropriation, a documented list of missing jewelry, a motion to freeze any financial transfers. The language was cold, exact, surgically precise. It was everything I no longer had the luxury of being. He slid the packet toward me across the desk. "You understand," he said quietly. "Once these are filed, it becomes a timeline we cannot reverse." I nodded. There was no fear in me now, just a clarity that had hardened into something immovable. "File them." He studied me for a moment before giving a short nod. "We'll serve him in 48 hours. I want everything synchronized with Morales's final drop." I left the office with a hollow electric feeling, like I was walking around holding a storm in my chest. That afternoon I returned to my condo and watched the footage from the previous night once more. Claire's hands in my drawers, her fingers grazing the velvet lining that once held my grandmother's pearls. Her casual tilt of the head as she examined the bracelet engraved with my childhood nickname. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't even hurried. She moved like someone who had been promised ownership. Nothing about that felt accidental, but I pushed the thought aside. There was more to do, and adrenaline disguised itself as focus as I moved through the condo, checking the new camera angles, making sure each timestamp lined up correctly. I sent everything to Harris in encrypted files, then shut my laptop and stood in the kitchen, letting the refrigerator's low hum steady me. Around 5, the lock clicked. Mike stepped inside, dusting snow from his hair. He looked tired but composed, carrying the strain of a man who believed stress made him look important. "Hey," he said, setting down his bag. "You're home early again. Project finished ahead of schedule." He smiled, but tension dragged at the corners. "Great. Maybe we can actually catch up tonight. It's been a weird week." I watched him move unaware, unbothered, as though the fabric of our life hadn't already started to tear beneath him. He walked into the kitchen and reached for a plate, humming under his breath. I studied the small details, the rhythm of his movements, the slight stiffness in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing toward the dining table, where the keys should have been. He paused, looked again, then again. A subtle flicker of confusion passed across his face. He checked the counter, the coffee table, the little ceramic bowl by the door, the tray under the mirror. His search quickened, more frenetic, more visible, until he was opening drawers he would never normally touch. "You seen my car keys?" he asked lightly, too lightly. "No." He forced a laugh, but the sound cracked at the edges. "Probably misplaced them." He kept searching. His words were nonchalant, but his movements were not. I recognized the jitter in his hands, the kind that belonged to someone whose plans depended on an object they suddenly couldn't find. He wouldn't risk asking outright again. Asking meant showing concern, and panic to someone like Mike was weakness. But I saw it anyway. He excused himself to the bedroom. When he thought he was far enough away, He began rummaging, opening every drawer in erratic succession. His voice drifted down the hall, sharp breaths, small curses, sounds he would never have let slip if he knew I was nearby. The cameras caught everything from the living room, the wide shot, the hallway reflection, his frantic pacing in the bedroom doorway. It wasn't evidence I needed, but it was a portrait, a psychological sketch of a man realizing the ground beneath him wasn't stable after all. When he returned, he'd composed himself. Badly. "You want Thai?" he asked abruptly. "Sure." He ordered dinner while I watched him from the corner of my vision. His knee bounced. His fingers tapped against the table. He kept looking at his phone, typing something, deleting it, typing again. Claire, I assumed, but I didn't check. Not yet. We ate quietly, too quietly. At one point, he asked, "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said. He smiled faintly at that, like the word was an anchor. Later, he showered. When he did, I checked the cameras again, not the recordings, but the live feed. Motion in the alley behind the building. 2 figures approaching the entrance. Hoods up, bodies hunched to block the wind. They entered through the side door with a key fob I recognized Linda's borrowed long ago, never returned. For a moment, they were ghosts slipping through the frame. The wide-angle lens caught the shadows first, then shapes. Linda, Robert, Claire. My breath stilled. They were not here for a visit. They were here for a counsel. I shut the laptop and moved softly toward the bedroom, listening to the water running behind the door. Mike wouldn't hear anything. I returned to the dining table, opened the laptop again, and watched the meeting unfold on the living room feed. They sat together like conspirators around a fire that didn't belong to them. Claire looked anxious, her fingers twisting the fabric of her sleeve. Linda's expression was sharp, tight, the brittle kind of anger that comes from feeling power slip. Robert was silent at first, his jaw clenched so hard, the tendons stood out like steel wires. The footage had no audio, but body language spoke its own fluent dialect. Linda's gestures were sharp, reprimanding. Claire's posture small, defensive. Robert's hands moved in precise slicing motions, strategizing, commanding. Mike emerged from the hallway, startled by their presence. He spoke quickly, his hands open, palms up, a gesture that telegraphed apology. Linda stood abruptly, advancing on him with a rigid, pointed finger. Her movements were a tirade without sound. "You let her get ahead of you. You weren't careful. You didn't control the situation." Claire flinched at the volume of Linda's silence. Robert rose slowly. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His restraint was sharper than any outburst. He moved with the cold disappointment of someone who believed their investment had underperformed. Mike tried to explain something, his gestures frantic, pointing at the table, the hallway, the calendar on the wall. But Claire said something, then something that made him snap his head toward her. Her shoulders fell, her hands covered her face. Mike's jaw tightened. Linda sat heavily, her hands trembling with rage. Claire reached for Mike's arm. He pulled it away. The footage showed fractures widening between them, a fault line splitting open in real time. This wasn't unity. This was a family cracking under the weight of its own scheme. When Claire stood and headed toward the front door, Mike didn't follow. Linda didn't stop her. Robert didn't try to mediate. She left alone, her movements jagged and shaking. Linda said something dark and clipped to Mike. Then she and Robert walked out together. The door shut behind them with a force that shook the camera frame. Mike stood alone in the living room for a long time, motionless, staring at the floor. When he finally looked up, the expression on his face wasn't anger, it was fear. He checked his phone again, typed, waited, typed again. I didn't need to guess who he was messaging. After several minutes, he picked up his coat, walked to the front door, hesitated, and then slammed it shut behind him as he left. I sat at the table, the glow from the laptop painting the room in blue shadows. The silence stretched between me and the screen. This was no longer a betrayal. It was an implosion. The architecture of their lies was failing. Stress fractures multiplied, blame shifted, alliances crumbled, goalposts moved in desperation. The hours that followed were quiet. I brewed tea. I paced. I checked the feed again. The condo remained still. Around midnight, Mike returned. He was alone. He looked unsteady, tired, frustrated. He tossed his phone onto the couch and sat heavily beside it. His face lingered in the half-lit frame as he pressed his palms over his eyes. For a long time he stayed there, shoulders sagging beneath the weight of a life he believed was unraveling without explanation. He didn't yet understand that it was unraveling because the truth was finally catching up to him. I closed the laptop, shut off the kitchen light, and let the darkness settle around me. By morning, the final pieces would be ready. The filings prepared, the evidence consolidated, the narrative no longer theirs to control. As the city slept, I sat in my own home. Silent, composed, waiting. The storm wasn't coming. It was already inside the house. The morning the documents were served began with the sound of footsteps in the hallway, measured heavy, official. I stood in the kitchen, coffee untouched, watching steam curl from the surface like a ghost of a breath. The knock came 3 seconds later. Firm, inevitable. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Through the peephole, I saw the court officer, black coat, gloved hands, a man who probably delivered life-changing papers before breakfast as if it were mail. He slid the envelope through the gap beneath the door with a soft, final whisper of paper against wood. For a moment, everything went still. Even the heat in the condo seemed to hold itself back. The brown envelope lay on the hardwood like something breathing. Then footsteps again, this time lighter, faster. Mike returning from his morning run far earlier than usual. Through the peephole I watched him slow. As he approached the door, confusion knitting his brow. He bent, picked up the envelope, and when he turned it in his hands, his face drained of color. His lips moved, a whisper I couldn't hear. He opened it with trembling fingers. The silence that followed was profound. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of a man finally seeing the consequences standing in front of him, printed in legal typeface. He read the first page divorce petition, then the second claims of misappropriation, the third itemized list of missing assets. His fingers twitched and the pages slipped from his grip. They scattered across the floor in a messy fan, a paper spill of all the things he thought would stay buried. He pressed both hands to his forehead and swayed. For a moment I wondered if he might faint, but instead he knelt on the floor, gathering the papers with movements that were too frantic to be called organized. He flipped through them again and again, like maybe the words would rearrange into something less damning on a second read. they didn't. When he finally looked up, his eyes found the camera in the corner of the hallway, one he'd always known was there, installed before any of this. His gaze locked onto it, not in anger, in fear. He turned toward the bedroom where he assumed I still slept. "Emily!" His voice cracked. "Emily, are you here?" I leaned against the wall out of sight, letting him search the condo room by room, watching him move through spaces he no longer had any claim to. His footsteps echoed hollow, uneven. When he finally returned to the living room, he sank onto the couch. His phone was in his hand almost instantly. He scrolled through contacts, tapping a name. Linda. I saw her name flashing on his lock screen reflection. The call connected. Even without audio, I recognized her. Her face, tightened lips thinning, hands flying into sharp gestures. She was shouting. I didn't need the sound to understand. She blamed him, he blamed her, then he blamed me. Linda stood up, pacing wildly, her movements jagged, furious. Robert appeared behind her, trying to calm her, but she shoved his hands away and paced faster. When she slammed something on the table, a mug, maybe the feed, jolted. Then she pointed directly at the screen, at him, at us. Mike shouted something back. His face twisted not with anger, but bewilderment, like he genuinely couldn't understand how everything had slipped away so quickly. He kept gesturing at the papers, shaking them in front of the camera, as if the pages were personally insulting him. Linda's posture changed. She froze mid-rant. Her shoulders sank. She looked defeated. In all the years I'd known her, I had never once seen defeat cross her face. The shift was seismic. When she finally spoke again, her gestures were slower, almost resigned. Robert put a hand on her shoulder. She didn't push it away this time. Mike pleaded with them, reaching, desperate. They ended the call. He tried calling Claire next. No answer. He tried again. No answer. He sent her a rapid flurry of texts. I didn't need to read them to know the shape of his panic. After half an hour, the condo grew unbearably quiet. He sat slumped on the couch, one hand covering his face. He stayed that way for several minutes. Then slowly he lowered his hand, stood up, and walked to the safe. Not the one in the bedroom, the one in the office closet where we kept older financial documents, tax records, and the last boxes of my father's archived papers. He typed the code. Wrong. He typed it again. Wrong. A third time. Denied. He froze. He tried another number, then another. The safe remained locked. He stepped back, staring at it like it had betrayed him. Then he whispered something into the stillness, a barely there exhale that the camera didn't catch. But I recognized the expression. He had just realized I'd changed the combination, that I had known. For how long he couldn't tell. He slammed his fist into the closet wall. Once, twice. The thud reverberated through the hallway. He staggered out of the office and collapsed onto the couch, again head in hands, rocking slightly. The rocking frightened me, not because of him, but because of the empty space between his thoughts. A man cornered wasn't always violent, but the possibility hung in the air like static before a lightning strike. I remained silent in the hallway, letting him believe the condo was empty, letting him believe whatever version of the situation his mind conjured. My pulse remained steady, a rhythm that felt oddly detached from the moment. Eventually, he stood and paced the apartment again. This time his steps were controlled, slow, intentional. He wasn't searching for anything now. He was absorbing the reality of the disaster. He was calculating. I recognized calculation more easily than panic. One was loud, the other was quiet, deadly. He walked to the dining table, picked up the divorce petition, and read it again. His eyes scanned the signatures, the dates, the legal citations. He flipped to the section outlining separate property inheritance protected under state law. He muttered something, a soft laugh, disbelieving, bitter. Then the fear returned. He picked up his phone and dialed someone else, a lawyer, some local attorney he must have found online, because the call was quick, mostly one-sided stammering. When the call ended, he sank into the chair and stared at nothing, a long, hollow stare, the stare of a man who finally understood he had no leverage left. Hours passed like that, slow, thick hours suspended in fog and tension. I stayed silent. I watched. He spiraled. And by the time sunset arrived, painting the walls in red and gold, the last piece of evidence from Jonah finally hit my inbox. The full report, the complete breakdown of 5 years of siphoned rent, the gambling losses, the vacations, the jewelry purchases traced to receipts, the unofficial tenancy of Claire at Unit 3B, the falsified maintenance records, the forged signatures. It was staggering, more elaborate than I imagined, more deliberate, more cruel in its details. I forwarded the file to Harris with a single line, complete. By the time I stepped into the living room, Mike was still sitting in the same position as before, stiff, hollow-eyed, unraveling in silence. He didn't see me at first. When he finally turned and found me standing there, he flinched like I was a shadow he thought he'd outrun. "Emily," he breathed. My name cracked in his throat. He stood, unsteady, pale. "We need to talk," he said softly. "Please, please, Em. Let me explain." There was nothing to explain. "We're past that," I said. He swallowed hard, looking at the divorce papers again, then at me. "You blindsided me," he said. Why didn't you say anything?" The irony was almost unbearable. "So you could hide more," I asked. "So you could move faster, so you could finish what you started." His face contorted. The pretense cracked open. "You think I planned this?" he snapped. "You think I wanted things to end up like this? Didn't you?" My voice stayed level, controlled. "You were going to divorce me after the transfer, after the POA." His pulse jumped visibly at his throat. He didn't deny it. The silence between us grew sharp, serrated like a blade pressed into the space. He sank back onto the couch. "Emily, I'm going to lose everything." The quiet was suffocating. Then he said it again, slower this time. "I'm going to lose everything." This time it wasn't a complaint. It was realization. And in the dull glow of the evening light, I watched the truth settle across his face like a shadow. He finally understood that the collapse was not something happening to him. It was something he had built himself. He leaned back, covering his eyes, his voice barely a whisper. "What am I supposed to do now?" I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The legal machine was already in motion, its gears grinding relentlessly forward. His reactions, fear, confusion, regret were irrelevant to outcomes already set in ink and evidence. Outside, snow began to fall, silent flakes drifting past the windows like falling ash. Inside, the condo felt hollow, not broken, just empty, like a stage after the actors have finished their lines. And for the first time watching him unravel under the weight of truth, I realized something quietly, coldly final. He wasn't the storm anymore. He was the aftermath. The final unraveling didn't happen in a courtroom or a dramatic confrontation. It happened in the slow, procedural grind of paperwork signatures and official stamps, mundane machinery chewing through the remnants of a life that had already collapsed. 2 weeks after the filings, I walked into the Suffolk County Courthouse for the last time. Morning light filtered through tall windows, sharp and cold as though even the sun refused to warm the place. The marble floors echoed with the clipped sound of heels shuffled briefcases, the murmur of lawyers rehearsing arguments. For everyone else, this building was noise and negotiation. For me, it was an exit. Harris met me on the second floor, a stack of documents under his arm. He didn't offer platitudes or small talk. He simply nodded the way someone nods when they know the person standing before them has survived something catastrophic. Inside the hearing room, the judge reviewed the evidence with a face carved out of stone, line by line, transaction by transaction. Each one a breadcrumb on the path Michael had paved toward his own destruction. He wasn't present. His attorney was an exhausted man who spoke too softly and apologized too often. By the time the judge declared the dissolution final, there was no triumph in me, no rush of vindication. Just stillness, a stillness that felt like standing on the shoreline after a hurricane and realizing the world was suddenly quiet. Too quiet, unnervingly quiet, but intact. Harris slid the final decree toward me with a faint smile. "You're free, Emily, free." It sounded like a word from another language. I walked outside into the cold air and let the wind sting my cheeks until they went numb. Boston moved around me in its usual rhythm. Honking horns, passing train students with backpacks, commuters clutching coffee cups. The world hadn't paused for my devastation, and strangely, that felt comforting. I took the long way home, walking along the Charles River. The water was dark glassy, reflecting a sky the color of steel. Runners passed me, breath misting in steady puffs. I watched the water ripple from a distant rower's oar and felt something deep inside shift. Not release, not hope, just space. The condo was silent when I returned. Michael hadn't lived there in weeks. His few remaining things, clothes, 2 boxes of papers, a broken tablet he never bothered to fix, were gone. I hadn't watched him take them. I didn't want to see the shape of his absence. I moved through the rooms slowly, my fingertips grazing the walls, the counters, the furniture. There were faint echoes of the life I thought I had. Ghosts embedded in the tile grout and the seams of the sofa, but they no longer had weight. They lived only in memory, and memory had lost its power to bruise. On the kitchen counter lay the envelope I'd left for Michael. The invoice for the garnishment schedule approved and enforceable. A cold administrative reminder of consequences. It was impersonal, surgical, a distant cousin of justice. I wasn't expecting him to show up, but late that afternoon the intercom buzzed. I hesitated before pressing the button. His voice crackled through the speaker, thin and frayed. "Emily, please, I just need 5 minutes." My pulse flickered in my throat. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anger. Just an unexpected annoyance, like a chapter refusing to close properly. Against better judgment, I pressed the door release. He came up slowly, footsteps dragging. When I opened the door, he stood there with a posture I didn't recognize. His coat hung awkwardly from one shoulder. His hair uncombed, his eyes shadowed with sleepless nights. There was no confidence left in him, no charm, no arrogance, just collapse. I stepped aside. He walked in carefully, as though the floor might splinter beneath him. He glanced around the condo as if seeing it for the first or last time. "It looks different," he murmured. "It's the same," I said. His throat bobbed. "No, it isn't." We stood in the living room, the distance between us, a chasm carved by years of unseen cracks. He fumbled with his hands, then spoke. "I got the decree." His voice was soft, almost brittle. "Final, no appeals allowed." He swallowed hard. "And the garnishment starts next month." I nodded. He lowered his eyes. "I deserve it." For a moment we stood there in silence. The weight of years between us, both real and fake, pressed in like a cold hand. Then he met my gaze again, really met it, and something fragile and human flickered in him. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. I need you to know something." His voice trembled on the last word. "It didn't start as a plan. Not for me. I didn't speak, didn't move." He continued. "My parents, they grew bitter long before we met. They regretted every decision they ever made. And when your parents died, they saw opportunity where they should have seen grief." He rubbed the back of his neck. "They pushed. They manipulated. They wanted what you had, what they thought they deserved." His breath hitched. "And I let them." He didn't cry, but something close to crying lived in his eyes, shame maybe, or the realization of what he'd allowed himself to become. "I cared about you," he whispered. "Maybe I never cared enough. Maybe not the right way. But it wasn't all lies." His chin quivered. "I know that doesn't matter. I just needed you to know." I stayed still. There were 1,000 versions of me, from 100 different points in time. Who would have wanted to hear this? Who would have clung to the idea that some part of our life had been real? Who would have used his confession as a balm on a wound that had been bleeding for years? But that version of me was gone. I gave him the only truth I had left. It doesn't change anything. His face crumpled, not dramatically, but subtly. A shift in the bones, a soft collapse in the corners of his eyes. "I know," he whispered. After a moment, he set something on the table. A small velvet pouch. The shape was unmistakable. My grandmother's pearls. He didn't explain how he retrieved them. He didn't offer excuses or apologies. He simply nodded once, turned toward the door, and left without looking back. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed through the condo long after he was gone. That night I packed. I didn't bother with sorting or nostalgia. I filled boxes with what mattered and donated everything else. By morning, a moving truck idled outside, breath rising from its exhaust like a living creature. I walked through the condo one last time, pausing at the window, where city lights blurred into a smear of white and gold. The reflection staring back at me wasn't the woman who had walked into this place years ago with trust and naivety stitched into her bones. She was someone new, someone forged, someone whole. Boston faded in the rearview mirror by noon. The drive west was long quiet, and strangely liberating. I traded brick buildings and river air for mountains, wide skies, and a horizon that didn't feel claustrophobic. Denver welcomed me with dry air pine silhouettes, snow-dusted across rooftops. I moved into a small house with blue shutters and a porch that creaked when I stepped on it. The yard was bare, waiting for spring, waiting for color, waiting for something to root itself again. Days slipped into weeks. I learned the rhythm of the neighborhood, the joggers at dawn, the dogs barking at mail trucks, the barista who drew leaf patterns in my foam. I planted hydrangeas and watched them bend under late frost, resilient enough to rise again. Sometimes late at night, I thought about trust, about whether I would ever be able to give it freely again. Maybe I wouldn't. Maybe that part of me had died on a cold Boston night, standing outside a door where my husband announced another woman's pregnancy like a victory. But trauma didn't define the rest of my life. It shaped it, sharpened it, clarified it. And in that clarity, I found peace. One evening, I sat on my porch as the sun dipped behind the Rockies, turning the sky into a wash of rose and amber. The wind carried the scent of pine and earth, something grounded, something real. For the first time in years, my chest didn't feel tight. For the first time in years, I breathed without bracing for impact. The past was a closed door. The future was quiet, and I was exactly where I needed to be. Not healed, not perfect, but whole in a way I'd never been before. In the fading light, surrounded by the soft hum of a new life, I understood something simple and profoundly final. Survival had given way to living.